All right, Julian, thank you very much. The FBI forensic scandal raises many questions about its so-called flawed trial testimony. Joining us from North Carolina is distinguished we need to talk about, distinguish the difference between flawed versus false and talk about those repercussions. And joining us is former FBI agent Quentin Williams. Quentin, welcome to Arise America. Thank you so much for coming on. I do appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Let me just say this, that this information is shocking to me. I'm just wondering, is it surprising to you?
It is surprising. As a former FBI agent and federal prosecutor, I always remain very proud of the way the FBI conducts its business, and this is flying in the face of what I know the FBI to be.
So how do you think this happened?
It could be a policy issue. They may have just had some issues with the way they processed evidence. I have to say that the FBI has the best laboratory in the U.S. The laboratory that the FBI uses is used to train other law enforcement agencies, and state and local law enforcement agencies, as well as other federal law enforcement agencies, send their evidence to the lab for processing. So this is really a shock for not just the FBI, but for all of law enforcement.
Well, tell me a little bit about that training. As you said, not only do they train, do they train their own agents, but other law enforcement agencies. Take me through a little bit about what that is actually like.
Well, I can tell you every FBI agent, when they go through Quantico, has to go through training and the gathering of evidence, the processing of evidence, the chain of custody for evidence, and then testifying about evidence. So every FBI agent has to do that. Now, there are specialists within the FBI who are agents, and then some non-agents who deal with these evidentiary issues out of the lab. And this is their job. This is what they do. This is 9 to 5, 8 to 6. They handle evidence.
So tell me, we, in the introduction, sort of explored the whole issue of, is this primarily an issue of flawed testimony or false testimony? What's your perspective there?
I would say false testimony is more intentional. That's somebody who is getting up on the stand and perhaps knowingly saying something that is wrong. When we're talking about faulty testimony, I think it's more of a policy or a procedural issue that has to be addressed, so that the way in which perhaps evidence is gathered and processed and analyzed from a policy standpoint may be faulty. And as a result, when an agent or a specialist gets on the stand to testify about that evidence, they're testifying pursuant to their policy, which is faulty. They are not intentionally falsifying evidence.
So then what do you think needs to be done to correct this? Let's first of all talk about going forward. How should the FBI change its protocol, change its training of the agents or its presentation of the evidence to prevent this from happening in the future?
Well, let's just look at the cases that have to be reviewed. They have to find out, they have to do a full-scale investigation, which is what is happening now, to find out what actually happened, what needs to be corrected. Once they find out what needs to be corrected, they have to correct it with those cases, because there are people who may have been imprisoned and even executed as a result of the information that came from this kind of testimony, this faulty testimony. So they have to find out all of that information first before they can do anything. And then using that information, knowing what is wrong with the policy, they have to enact new policy measures that would be protective in many ways so that they wouldn't find themselves in this situation again.
Yeah, indeed. And I want to push you just a little bit, Quentin, on this. Of the 28 examiners in the FBI's laboratory that gave this testimony from the microscopic hair comparison unit, 26 overstated forensic matches in ways that favored the prosecution, and more than 95% of the 268 trials reviewed so far. How does that not sound like a conspiracy to you?
It sounds, well, because I know the FBI, I don't think that there was a conspiracy. I think that there was as we said, a faulty policy. There were faulty measures for examining. It could be at any phase of the evidentiary chain. Could have been in the way they collected the evidence, in the chain of custody of the evidence, or the way they analyzed the evidence. Most probably it's because of the way they analyze the evidence. I think that's what we're talking about here. And if you have a policy or a system of analyzing evidence in a faulty way, that means that everybody who is analyzing evidence in that system is doing it incorrectly. I don't think that they were, as a group, conspiring to say, you know what, we're gonna falsify this evidence. That would be another level of it wouldn't be negligence. That would be intentional, and that would be criminal.
Indeed, and the investigation does go on. As we say, this is just the tip of the iceberg, but we thank you so much for your perspective so far. Quentin Williams, appreciate it.
My pleasure.